Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you. Could you switch on your video?
Okay.
Yes.
Now, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Rahel Mogas. I am founder and CEO for Ethiopian Production Industry PLC, a company that is producing Ethiopian flatbread, and we produce this for both local and export market. Initially, our company was started in Washington, D.C., just as being an importer. I am proud to say that we're a pioneer in importing fresh injera to the Washington, D.C. metro region. But as of 2012, I'm now in Ethiopia. As of 2012, I do the other part, which is I am the processor and the exporter, which is completely a different aspect of the business. But so far, we've been doing this and exporting to the Ethiopian diaspora. That is our market segment. And we are aspiring and we are in the process of adding the mainstream market as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rahel. So I do believe we're going to have very, very interesting discussions today. I shall be able to introduce Flora when she comes on board. She's still trying to log in. But allow me to just quickly set the tone for the meeting. Olivier, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm Olivier Haiman. I'm a Deputy Program Manager for the USAID East Africa Market System activity. It's a 5-year new program that is designed to deepen regional integration, creating jobs, creating employment, livelihoods, by combining 4 critical areas. One is, of course, market development, market linkages. The second is scaling up technologies. Third one is about resilience in the east and horn part of Africa, and of course dealing with the policy. So those 4 key areas are, of course, targeting a wide range of actors, but we believe that our key entry point will be the private sector, engaging the private sector, especially women and youth. And we want to make sure that we are designing a program that is sensitive to what women and young people in East Africa are aspiring to. So I'm happy to be here with the panelists and the other participants. I want to learn more about the different ideas, different initiatives that has taken place in the region, for us also to agree on, to have an idea of some of the new areas that the East Africa Market System activity can invest in. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. And it's a pleasure to have you here. I do believe that the engagements herein today would be able to inform a very strategic project or program that's going to be focusing on building private sector development in the region. So allow me to just introduce myself. For those of you who we may have not interacted with, my name is Sandra Wera. I'm the CEO of the COMESA Business Council. Just to give you a brief background, this webinar has been put together is a core initiative, a core partnership between COMESA Business Council and Feed the Future East African Market System, which is a USAID project, and we are partnered together to look at a common vision to promote the empowerment of women in agriculture and trade. So this webinar today will aim at exploring strategies that can be employed by different stakeholder groups on how to enhance women's access to resources, financial resources, human capacities, digital and technical skills, towards enabling them to be part and parcel of regional agricultural trade value chains, and to also more effectively participate in evolving their business models to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic period that we are currently living in. So a bit of background about the COMESA Business Council. We are a business member organization and private sector institution of COMESA. We bring together a diverse group of businesses and associations in the region from all 34 sectors in 21 countries in COMESA. The CBC was established as a direct response to industry challenges in COMESA, which include poor consultative processes, influence of businesses in policy impediments in the region. And CBC has been put together so that it can actually represent industry interests and to ensure that we are part and parcel of the ongoing policy formulation agenda that is set to boost intra-Africa trade and to address support systems and networks that are supposed to be promoting private sector to be the backbone of the economy and accessing markets regionally and internationally across the globe. We seek to improve the competitiveness and deepen the participation of private sector in regional and global trade through three key areas, which is business policy and advocacy, business facilitation, and enterprise development. Just to give you a bit of background about what we're doing within this particular spectrum, just to give you a background of agriculture trade, agriculture is the backbone of the economy in COMESA region. It provides livelihood for about 80% of the region's labor force and accounts for approximately 65% of foreign exchange earnings. In fact, a couple of years ago, I do remember one of our leading leaderships within Africa said that Africa has a potential to be the food basket of the world. So agriculture is clearly a driving factor in terms of intra-trade within Africa and also our presence within the larger market share in the global economy. However, even though agriculture is the mainstay of employment and export proceeds, it accounts for at least comparatively low share of value-added produce, especially if you look at it from a percentage perspective, it's about 32% of COMESA's GDP, which reflects the high persistence of subsistence farming and the incidence of low-value staples in the crop mix. According to UNCTAD, in a report that was done in 2017, agriculture is primarily a female-intensive trade, especially in countries like Uganda, Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Malawi, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe, where as men prevail in agriculture employment, as women prevail in agricultural employment, there are less men who actually focus on this particular field for employment. But when you look at other countries like Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Mauritius, Comoros, and Ethiopia, you do see a strong equal mix of both men and women within the agricultural employment sector. So the aggregate figure also conceals the female-intensive nature of specific subsectors and activities. So you find that women tend to dominate employment in value chains for high-value products such as fresh fruit, vegetables, and flowers. And for instance, we've seen that women account for about 75% of employment in the flower industry in Kenya and in Tanzania. So at least overall, you say nearly 3/4 of employed women in COMESA work in the agricultural space. We've also noted that socioeconomic or social cultural gender norms and different types of constraints include that are faced by women within this particular sector include limited mobility, reduced access to training, and a disproportionate burden of care work. And these are some of the key factors that are holding rural women back and also holding them back from moving into the formal working space or formal employment space and into larger value chains within the agriculture sector. So some of the key gender gaps that will also be addressed in agriculture within this meeting, I do not want to preempt the discussions, are, for example, the burden of domestic care work, where you actually see that a lot of women in the rural community are affected by domestic work burdens, are taking care of household duties and responsibilities, and this also limits the chances for them to access educational attainment. And this, of course, leads to a lower literacy rate and education for women in the rural area. And of course, this also now further translates into substantial competitive disadvantages for female farmers and rural entrepreneurs in very many key respects, which definitely leads to some of the challenges that they will be facing when they're trying to access various markets in the region. Of course, another issue that we've also seen is household farm labor, where you find that a lot of women's productivity is affected by the fact that they focus a lot more on subsistence farming and for home consumption, as opposed to looking at large-scale farming. And of course, there's also the aspect of access to resources and market opportunities, where women consistently face structural biases in accessing credit, accessing guarantee, collateral funds, accessing agricultural inputs, extension services, and markets. So gender biases also fall into the supply chain, where you realize that a lot of women do not also have access to transport facilities, logistics, and market information that can help to improve their product entry into various markets within the region. So these are just some of the key discussions that we'll be touching on here today. And I do believe that this discussion will be very, very exciting and interesting. I'd like to encourage the participants here to post their questions into the chat box, and we shall be able to respond to them accordingly. For those of you who would want to actually ask your questions, we could probably let you come on board as a panelist to ask the question if it's very specific. But other than that, we shall also endeavor to respond as much as possible through the chat box itself. So now I shall come to the panel, to our panel discussants. Allow me to start with you, Dr. Asfour. Yes. I just want to make sure to see if Flora is back. No, she's still not. She's coming through though. So Dr. Asfour, allow me to start with you. You have mentioned that you are the chairperson of the African Business Council, and you also wear very many hats. I believe you represent the Egyptian Businesswomen Association, and you also represent the African Alliance for Women Economic Empowerment and the Business and Professional Women's International Network. So I'm assuming within all these forums, you have learned a lot about what women need to establish, or what women need to do to position themselves to take advantage of regional and global markets. So in this case, I'm just going to focus on the CFTA, on our large African market here. What do women need to do to position themselves to take advantage of the opportunity presented within the CFTA?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sandra. That's a very important question, especially now that the CFTA is our role as private sector. We are the really custodians. I mean, the governments are putting the rules, but the private sector are the one who is implementing it. Let aside that we women contribute more than 50% of our African continent, but also with reference to agriculture, 80% women. So I have put what I call it the strategy, which I call it the Triad of Empowerment. What is needed from all of us actually to do to implement the CFTA and to economically empower of women. And those Triad of Empowerment is based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is the real about the private sector, the people, and how we empower the women herself as a private sector, her personality, to give her all the information she needs for the trade, to make sure that we build her capacity, to make sure that we train her to be able to lead her enterprise, to do the real trade, and to give her power as herself, her self-esteem, her self-confidence as her personality. That's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is the policy. What do we need from our African leaders and our presidents in order to make sure that we have the right policy that is favoring our women-owned businesses, our women-owned trade, cross-border women traders, the women are in the export, even the women in the rural areas that are cultivating and into agriculture. So the policies that we are advocating for, even as I was chair of COMESA Business Council, I was asking for a preferential treatment for SMEs, including women. And that's how really President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, he just really pick up on that. And now they have 30% of all government procurement goes to SMEs, women, youth, and people with disabilities. So we need to address our heads of states, our African leaders, to see how we do it. And I am very happy that even President Ramaphosa of South Africa, as he was chairing the African Union, in his acceptance speech, he said that this is 40% at least goes to women-owned businesses. So this is one of the policy we need to do, plus the financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is very important because I can access the tender, but if I have no access to finance, we cannot happen. One very important project that we also led in COMESA Business Council is about the simple digital payment solution. How can a woman access trade from one country to within her country, but how we do it across countries? So it includes the regulatory frameworks, it includes the telecommunication companies, the central banks. We need to facilitate the trade among our women. And the third pillar really is about the product. So it's personality, policy, and product. The product is very important because I can see women that, for instance, in the agriculture sector, but there is no agri-processing. So we need to see how we transform the raw materials within agriculture, or even raw material to be industrialized, to be manufactured, and to have the branding, the designing, the packaging, the standardization. And here I also mentioned one of the important projects that we did under my leadership with COMESA Business Council is about sourcing from local vendors. How do we make agreement with big corporates to source from our from our local vendors, but that also include half of it for women. They needed to have a standardized product that could meet the standard and the criteria of those to supply to those big corporates. So that's how we trained more than 480 SMEs on the ground in order to meet the standards. So all of us actually, as working for economic empowerment of women, we need to see how these three pillars go with reference to economic empowerment, how to address the heads of state, especially that at the level of Africa Business Council, which I am honored now to be chairing, we are, this is advocacy pillars that we want to work with the heads of state in order to have how we really promote our business linkages, our information among each other, how do we know about each other, how we supply the women with machinery, for instance, agriculture, agribusiness, the packaging, lot of the things on the ground, agro-processing. I was just in Tanzania, they have a lot of, for instance, many products, not even, it is ruined. In many of our agricultural, when they don't sell the fruits and vegetables, they are ruined. So this is how science and technology can come and add value to the products. Like, for instance, we have how packaging with our mangoes and our pineapple. In Thailand, it's a whole industry of packaging of pineapple and mango. This is, and macadamia and all our nuts. Many of our nuts goes to the Far East to be roasted there, and then they export it to the Gulf. Why not having our roasting here in Africa, packaging in Africa, and supplying to us in Africa and to other markets? This is what we really need. All these challenges of trade about the proper information, about the payment system, about the shipping, or I call it the posting, about the proper presentation, all these challenges of trade, it is us who have to deal with it and see how we really give information for our women about what she needs, make the marketing procedure for her important. We use the digital platform that's already present here, and this is how we make awareness for our women, whether in trade or on the agricultural sector. So there is a lot of factors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Asfuri. I think you actually set the tone for the discussions right now. I'm just coming to you, Dr. Birungi. You know, one of the key questions that people have always asked is why is it that some of these agro-value chains are traditionally male dominated? What does it need to take to encourage more women to participate within the agricultural trade scene? So I want to pose that question to you based on your experience working with Kilimo Trust and a lot of farmers on the ground. So what efforts need to be made to effectively mainstream gender in agro-value chains? And what interventions should we actually look at and consider that are gender sensitive, especially when trying to discuss or look at actions that should be taken to address gender inequalities within the value chain?
Thank you very much. I'll be sharing experience that we have gathered over the last 15 years in building value chains in East Africa. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So in terms of value chains, I think what we have found is that women, like as you have rightfully said, and the previous speaker said, is the women are involved in the value chains, but they're involved in the least income, or the nodes that provide or generate the least income for them, or the least productive, in that sense that most of them are, for instance, in the production node, very few are in the trading nodes or in the processing nodes. And this is exacerbated by culture because they play a big role in terms of providing labor, like you have rightfully said. And of course, I think the fact remains is that a lot of trade, as you have already mentioned. 75% of trade in Africa is largely informal. And many of these women are involved in informal trade. And so they miss out on the statistics. So that's why we have, in a sense, that distorted perspective. When we talk about trade and trade specifically, women are not involved in some of these in trading of food commodities, for instance, in East Africa, because they lack the resources. They don't have the capital. They don't have access to productive assets like land to access capital. And also they're involved in looking after the children and domestic chores. And so they're not able to move away from home. But the other reality is, for instance, I can give you an example, is we invited women for training. It has been mentioned that capacity building is critical to ensure that women are involved in these value chains. We invited women for training. We happen to the information, the databases don't have women's names, but they have their husbands' names. So in the community, we found that we invited women for training on standards, and the men attended. And when we asked one of the men, one of the counselors, how comes you, the one was that you have attended, not your wife? He said, they're the ones on the farm, but I make the decisions, and I'll tell her what she needs to do when I get back home. So are we actually focusing on those that are receiving or require that support? Maybe not. And I think to address the issues of information. The issue of information. So rightfully said, we need to give women information, but how do we share this information, especially now at a time post-COVID, where women can actually access information through multiple platforms? Let's get women to get onto those databases. Let us be very sensitive to ensuring that we actually speak to the women in these value chains, because most of them are at home, involved in production and not networking with others. The other issue that constrains women from being in the value chains is also if we talk about communication, their own self-esteem, are they leaders? Has been mentioned already. What do we need to get women to be more empowered to address issues of self-esteem and be able to negotiate for themselves? Most of these aspects are put on as add-on to programs, and that's what we have found in most of the interventions that we have, is the gender mainstreaming is put in as an add-on to a program. Ensure that 30% of the women on the program the beneficiaries are women. But are we actually addressing the underlying issues that constrain these women from being leaders themselves and being able to transform those businesses that they own or small enterprises that may be coming up? No, we don't. And I think we have been able to establish approaches in which women can be supported, in addition to mainstream programs of value chain development that are low cost, that can ensure that women are actually involved in these value chains, supported, in addition to equipping them with knowledge, skills, give them the ability to negotiate for themselves, negotiate for others, network with other women. They need to know that if a business opportunity comes in and I want to produce and I can't get it, can I give Sandra's business, can I give Rahel's business to also supply this? How do we work together in groups, build those institutions of women so that they are much more robust and able to trade? We find that most of the women in groups, they are not in groups in these value chains, they're individuals, and therefore this constrains their ability to take advantage of economies of scale. Whether they are traders, whether they are farmers, whether they are processors, very few of them are working together as a collective resource. And lastly, if I may end, how do we ensure that more women are integrated in these value chains? We need to also see, in terms of supporting the value chain and value chain development, which value chains do you select? We have found over the last 10 years, working directly with different actors, is that there are certain value chains that are women specific, We've found that some are youth specific, and we have found some that are male dominated. The male dominated ones are usually the cash crops. They are highly capital intensive. The markets are usually across borders. It takes a lot of effort to ensure that the return on investment is generated. But we find women more in value chains like beans, the food crops, because theirs is about food security, income security right at the household level. Will I be able to take my children to the hospital if they are sick? And then we find that the youth, for instance, are more involved in those value chains that have low income to start up. So we find them in poultry, we find them in horticulture as well. So we need to see how best we can integrate value chains and integrate value chain support and development. Can we have programs that are integrative in nature, where you have, for instance, coffee and beans, and you are ensuring that the household as a unit is able to have the income security, food security, and address also climate climate smart agricultural aspects. So those are the kind of things that we can look at to ensure that women are integrated better in value chains, right at from the very from production as well as right to markets. The last thing I think I also should have mentioned is that there are labor-saving technologies that we can give to women that are now being produced, that can be given to women to ensure that they can are more productive in those value chains. And they can be motorized threshers, they can be aggregation and collection centers, where women can actually do both their domestic chores, but at the same time generate an active income. Even if it is not production, they can offer services, even inputs as well in the value chain. So I think I'll stop there.
Yes. Thank you, Virunji. That was quite insightful, I must say. And since we're on the subject of integrating women into various, levels of the value chain, I want to come to you, Paloma. Paloma, yours is a very, very interesting industry, I must say. Well, primarily, I personally found it very interesting because of some of the discussions we've had, where it's very male dominated. Traditionally, I would believe, and I think also Virunji has highlighted why some of these reasons are. Maybe it's also very capital intensive industry or sector. But it'd be good to hear from you why this is so. And as a woman who is leading the Cereal Millers Association in Kenya, what has been your journey to this leadership platform, and what have you actually seen as some of the challenges or constraints for women who are trying to break into this particular market? Thank you. Tough question coming to you.
I know. Thank you very much, Sandra. And I'll just say the same thing. It's a very interesting question, to say the least. I'll try and put it in perspective. So I work for an association of competitors within the milling industry. Out of 49 members, 3 are represented by women and the other 46 by men, already telling you a story. So imagine having a female referee in a men's football match. And instead of having 2 teams, you have 46 competing teams. Take a guess how arbitrating this match might sometimes turn out to be. So there have been a few challenges, and across, in my journey to come to the Cereal Millers Association, I learned that, we all have some sort of unconscious bias, and it's of some sort which will play out probably in our everyday lives, and sometimes even in our interactions in the workplace. So working women, I find, already face challenges in their workplaces. They are either judged on being maybe too hard, too soft in most cases, and probably never just right. So how many times have we seen women overstudying, overdoing, and outperforming everyone else at work, only to be passed over for promotions, or sometimes even asked to train someone else who they would later report to? These are challenges that we faced along the way. Working women of color also face an interesting set of challenges. So apart from the normal challenges women face in their workplaces, they also have to deal with people's attitudes and cultures, which can sometimes be daunting. I have on many occasions walked into high-level meetings and had people, look behind me to see who Mr. Fernandez, who would be attending this important meeting, because they'd probably brushed you aside and said, it can't be her. But I say all is not lost. And what can we do? What can be done better really to promote women in industry? And I think one of the first things we need to do is we shouldn't allow ourselves to see women in positions or industries. At this point, we should actually be expecting it. As women in industry, one of the things I've learned is that we really need to make a deliberate attempt to encourage and mentor other women to join the industry. I think too often we tear each other down rather than building each other up. Well, I feel there's actually a lot of room for all of us to shine. The perception that women don't belong in factories also comes at a great cost for women and their employers. Too often women in male-dominated workplaces feel like outsiders, in the workplace, and they tend to get excluded. Now, whether it's either due to their unique quality or their difference, they still feel excluded. So in that case, we really need to start building more inclusive workplaces, and that way we create a better culture for all employees to coexist. One of the things that Dr. Birunji said earlier is, enhance use of technology so that we can reduce the manual aspects that require probably masculinity. And this would allow women to consider some of these jobs. Again, it's no surprise that women in this industry really struggle in terms of fair payment with their male counterparts. And I think it's so important that workplaces need to be doing wage audits to ensure that this issue is sorted out. And I'm sure, and other women will talk about this, but there are ways that women can be incentivized to get manufacturing grants and loans. But I think what we're asking for is with more understanding terms. This would entice them into manufacturing. So thank you very much, Sandra.
Thank you, Paloma. Very, very key aspects and recommendations you've put forward there. There are quite a number of questions that are also coming on board about food safety standard requirements and the ISO certification matters. We shall be discussing that shortly. But allow me to now take you to Flora Mutahi. Flora, you operate in the flora and fauna horticulture sector as well. And it would be good to also hear your experience in terms of how you have performed as a woman leader in business within the COVID-19 pandemic. What are the challenges that have impacted you as a business at a national level when exporting in the region and also when you're trying to export into international markets? Have some of these challenges been gender-centric or primarily focused on the barriers you've been facing due to the, the regulatory measures that are put in place due to COVID-19? So, and what have been your survival tactics to ensure that your business still stays afloat in spite of these dynamics? It'd be good to hear from you on that. Thank you. Your microphone is muted, Flora.
Sorry, thank you very much and good afternoon.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Yes.
And so please start by introducing yourself, because when we're doing introductions, we kind of missed you in that. Yes. So please start by doing so.
So I'm Flora Mutahi. I'm the founder and CEO of a brand called Melvin's Tea here in Kenya. Last year, we just celebrated our 25 years. So basically, COVID was, of course, a shock to the whole system. It was immediately a call to shut down and go home. So there was a big panic in the offices, but there was also this thing of how, and for me as a leader, it was how do I then make sure that we're able to continue to pay our salaries, because there's no visibility on this. This is not something we went to business school to, we had no answers. So what we did is we just sort of like educated everybody, told them, this is what we're going to do, did the sanitizing, we bought them masks, immediately got into a counseling system where we said, anybody under stress, this is what we're going to be able to do. Mm-hmm. But what did that do to my business? Well, initially, in the first month, there was panic buying, because we thought we're going to go on a lockdown. So everybody just bought. And we actually almost had to start running night shifts to be able to survive. The second month was a little bit more quiet. But of course, because we have a natural proposition, we take tea. Well, we do tea, which is a healthy product. And then on top of that, we flavor our tea with natural products. So it's natural ginger, natural masala, cinnamon, cardamom. So what happened is we started promoting it as an immunity package. And definitely, so we did well during the COVID season. We really didn't suffer other than the initial shock. But what did that do to the fact also that our supply chain is very, very local, because majority of our product is the tea and the flavorings. We didn't really suffer on that front, but there was a little bit around the general supply chain, things like the filter paper that was put under a lot of strain. But fortunately for us, we were able to source it locally. Prices, of course, started going up. They've taken a little bit of time, but for especially now, this particular year, prices have started going up, of course, because the people who are importing, the consolidators, there's not enough freight, of course, so everybody's actually facing larger prices. So what are the key aspects for survival of people within the industry? I think that the first one would be about being able to build resilience within your organization. So for us, the fact that we source a lot locally was to our advantage, and we were able to sort of see it through. But I think that the learnings we've learned from that is so perhaps let's try and localize our supply chain as much as possible. Try and use locally manufactured, locally intermediary goods if possible, as opposed to importing. And this is the advantage I keep saying of manufacturing, as opposed to traders whose businesses was cut almost you'd say immediately. Logistics, of course, getting the product out of the borders was a challenge as everybody locked down. And, of course, by the time we put down COVID protocols, the cost of those protocols, getting trucks to move across, that was definitely a big challenge. And what do I think is the future is about adoption, adoption, like I said, to local value chains, pivoting, being able to repurpose your business. I know of a particular, a few women, especially in the Fashion Council, the government was enough to actually say, listen, we're not going to import this product. Well, I'm not sure it was able to come in, but they said we're purposely going to give orders to these people. So Fashion Council turned around and they started doing masks to the tune of 10,000 masks per person. They retooled and they managed to pull together, approach government. PPEs also, there's some companies I know that were doing beds, hospital beds, ventilators.
Hello? I believe we've lost Flora. Yes? Okay. I'm sure Flora will be trying to log in again. As per usual, we're always trying to adjust to the challenges of internet and network. We shall be having Baha back shortly. But I just also want to touch on the aspect that Flora had, a very, very important note that Flora had brought up on the aspect of promoting manufacturing capacity. Flora, are you there? I can see her trying to log on. Yes, but promoting local manufacturing capacity and also promoting a lot of alternative sourcing from within local markets. So I just want to raise on that because Rahel Moges of Ethio Green Products is actually specifically focusing on teff. Teff is one of the most nutritious grains within Africa, actually has been known as a superfood. I think, Rahel, you mentioned that earlier, worldwide. And this is a product you're now producing in mass, isn't it? And you're also looking at exporting it into various markets in the region. So how has it been for you as a woman entrepreneur in terms of penetrating this particular market, building your demand market within Ethiopia, and also looking at exploring new markets internationally? How have you navigated this very, very interesting pathway?
Thank you. Just before I mention about the business expansion, what I would like to say is, let me talk a little bit about the challenges that we have. I'm sure this is like mostly for most African countries. For example, with teff, the big problem that we're facing is having it, the quality. When I say quality, because especially at the farming side, since we never had this kind of, because most of the farmers who are farming teff is mostly for cash crop, meaning they are very smallholder farmers. Because of that, which means they combine, everybody combine their own grain and maybe supply to the union. And unfortunately, on the union side, the problem we're facing is there is no such a thing as a category by type or variety. Everything is mixed up. So it is very difficult for you to come up and say which variety you're following, what kind of recipe you can follow, because it is all mixed up. So that is the biggest challenge that we're facing. And the second is about the expansion. Also, what we're facing is a middleman. That is the biggest challenge.
You're saying the Wi-Fi in the...
Yes, please go on.
Okay, the middleman, because the middleman is almost, I can say it is the middleman who's benefiting, who's making the profit, who's controlling the market. So you can say, for example, as far as price, the farmers and the processors, like the private sector, it is a very challenging time because the middleman is the one who is setting the price, basically controlling the market direction. So because of that, it is highly challenging. Another thing what I would like to say is, as a business, as a small business, in order for you to venture your business and go expansion, you need some form of research and development, R&D. And as a small business, you cannot do R&D. That is where I believe the government should intervene. Because with the R&D, we can say like, what kind of certification we're requiring, what the market is even looking for. When we go for that, we're going for less, with the less cost, we can produce more. But unfortunately, everything falls on the private sector, meaning reducing the market. In addition to that, beside the market, we are the processor, we are the one who's getting the product, the grain, all that, it is a setback. So because of this, I would say, in addition to the R&D, unfortunately, for example, in Ethiopia, I can tell you, I think it's not just women, but I can say most farmers in Ethiopia are very smallholder farmers. Because of this, every farmer produces a very small amount. And for us to get the real products is a big challenge that we are facing in our production side. And the other thing is also like, since our business is for the export market, what we're facing, the big challenge is also at the export destination, meaning we have to face a certification requirement. And that certification requirement is, as you know, when you qualify for certification, you have to apply traceability. So which means you have to connect the whole dots. You cannot say, okay, my manufacturing is certified and I can produce certified product. You cannot say that, which means you have to do from the value chain until the production. So that is also the biggest challenge that we are facing. But how do we overcome the other, especially the export market? The other thing that we're facing is we are using Ethiopian Airlines because we're dealing with perishable item. And because of that also, logistics is a major setback for us because we cannot use surface, as I said, because it is perishable. But at the same time, we have to use the airline, and it is very expensive, very expensive. So that is also the major challenge that we're facing. So for us, I believe in order to overcome all this, we have having a proper logistics. Again, when we talk about logistics as a private sector, it is not my call to arrange the logistics. It is also the government, I believe. So unless that in place, it is very difficult to meet the market demand. But the only other option that we're looking right now is by trying to produce non-perishable item. So we'll be able to use surface instead of just Ethiopian Airlines, because it is very expensive when we use the Ethiopian Airlines like cargo systems. So that is what we're facing right now. And in addition to the logistics side as well, access to finance is also a major thing. Because without access to finance, expansion is very difficult. As a business, you have everything, your inventory and so on, you're tied up. So another thing is also that. The other thing, I believe what the government also, what they need to do is about they have to give us insurance about farming. Without insurance on farming, farmers are not encouraged, to do such processing. So that is another thing that we need to add to the business as well. And also I heard Dr. Aman earlier, she talks about the packaging. Packaging is also a big challenge that we're having, because proper packaging is a key, especially at the export destination. So that is also another issue we're facing, because as you know, the world is trying to avoid, stay away from plastics and so on. So that is another thing we really have to focus on, is biodegradable packaging, because especially, for us being as African, I believe we need to care about environment more than anybody else, because for us, the environment is key to our success. So with a combination of all this, we have to encourage, for example, as a business, I cannot just do the packaging myself, but instead, if other players also involved in the packaging, processing packaging, so it's a share, with a shared duty, that is when we can bring success. Unfortunately, in Africa, what I see is the business do everything themselves. When you see the other more developed countries, if you see them, the supplier of packaging is here, the supplier of your grain is there. All you have to do is a matter of bringing them together. But for us in Africa, unfortunately, we are everything. By doing that, it really minimizes our power of advancement. So that is what I see.
That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very important point that you've raised. Now, I'd like to, I'm sure that I can see a lot of questions that have been raised, Rahel, for you on the same as well. And I will be coming to the questions shortly. So Dr. Asfour, if you look at what has been raised on this particular platform, and I'm cognizant of the fact that you have to jump into another meeting. So I just want to raise this here so that it can also become an agenda for the African Business Council, an agenda that should also be discussed at the AU level, especially right now, as a lot of meetings are being prepared to strengthen the operationalization of the CFTA. What are the key policy areas that we can actually look at and to contribute to empowerment of women farmers, and to also empower women access to critical resources and facilities that can ensure transformative processes within their businesses, to ensure that the businesses are quality businesses, they're able to access markets, they're able to meet the purchasing requirements of the buyers within regional and global markets, and they're also able to work, collaboratively to meet the common interests of the high demand market that is also within Africa, especially now that we're looking at alternative sourcing from our regional markets. So what are the policy areas you think could actually contribute to some of these particular aspects? And then thirdly, is it possible to secure an agenda and a discussion at the AU level, especially on women in agri-trade, so these aspects can also be raised within that particular intervention area? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think you touched on very important issues. As the current chair for Africa Business Council, I really commit myself to support all the issues about agri-trade, because it's very important about economic empowerment of women. And as I mentioned, our policy advocacy pillars would be really focusing on the government procurement, on financial inclusion, but also, as my sister Rahel have already touched on, that we need to see how much support they can do for the transformative business. I mean, with reference to, first, it has to be linked with science and technology, as I mentioned in my first intervention, because many of our men on the ground, for instance, they grow crops, they don't know if these crops are good for the soil or not. And then when they grow the crops, they are not sure if there is infestation with this crop, how they will deal with this infestation or any affection for disease for the crops. And then in the harvesting or in the agro-processing, they need support with reference to machineries for packaging, machinery, for instance, for solar dryers, as I have been saying many times, to dry our fruits and vegetables that have been spoiled all the time when they are not sold. So we need to link the issue of machinery and the issue of science and technology with agribusiness processing. And then with the reference to marketing, we need all the information that they want to have with reference to the marketing, the digital platform that is present, and to see how really the issue of the papers, the certification, the standardization, all this is very important. So I believe that as it's a partners of development, the government, the civil society, and the private sector, we need to establish business development centers and business incubator that will promote our women in agri-trade. So this business development center will be a holistic approach to see what position paper we need to table to our heads of states on their agenda, but on the other side, we train the women in agriculture, agribusiness, and we see how to link them with the science and technology institutes and to make for the supply for them for the machinery, for packaging or drying or whatever they need. So it has to be a holistic approach, a plan that we can put together. CBC can make this plan, and we see from all our institutions how can we support it, but we need a holistic approach that we can do, because even with the procurement, for the government procurement, I know, for instance, in Kenya, there's 30% for procurement for women-owned businesses and people with disabilities and youth. But the access to the tenders, we need information about the tenders. We need finance to be able to access those tenders. Normally, when the government give a tender, they need they don't repay except after a period of time. The women cannot have this ability to have this burden. So we need to have special incentives for our women on the ground. And all above this, we need our governments to give priority to our African products and really to ensure the transformation of our raw materials and to have this not to export our raw material and then get it after being added value. We need a commitment from our African leaders, and we see as civil society organizations and business organizations and regional like CBC or continental as Africa Business Council, we are ready to support the women on the ground. Thank you very much. I have to excuse myself. Thank you very much for that. It has been a great being with you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Asfo. That is well noted, well received. Before we move on to the second round of questions, I would just want to raise some of the questions that are here on our platform. Rahel, there are quite a number of questions that have been directed to you specifically. From Waktola Muleta. She asks, Rahel, did you try contract farming or outgrower schemes to overcome the teff quality problem? And Joyce Cacho also asks, as the same way you've been talking about the middleman or middlewoman, could you also talk about the Ethiopia Commodity Exchange and how it is contributing to reducing the risk of quality of teff? Maybe you could respond to those two questions.
What was the second one, please? Can you repeat the second question?
Could you talk about the Ethiopia Commodity Exchange and how it is contributing to reducing the risk of quality of teff?
Okay, for the contractual farming, in fact, we've been in communication with the union, and I'm really interested to work with women farmers. In fact, when I first started, I was working with women farmers, but unfortunately, as our demand grows, they couldn't sustain and be able to supply us. So because of that, of course, we can do the contractual farming. But again, my interest is to work with women farmers. And each time, like, we communicated with the unions to say, like, give us a number of women farmers that we can work with. Most of the time, we did not find it to be that easier to get. But yes, that is one of the direction that we're trying to move, and that is where we are moving. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult, as I said, to meet the certification requirement. Because certification, as I said, it requires traceability. Without working with specific farmers, there is no way that we can guarantee traceability. So for that reason, yes, we are in the process of working with the contract farming. As for the question of commodity exchange, I don't know if you know, but the commodity exchange doesn't include teff as one of their grain. they mostly they work with the other cash crops, like, they work with coffee, sesame, and maybe some other grains, but if so far has not been part of the commodity exchange. And another thing that I would like to mention here is, for example, in Ethiopia, of course, teff is our #1 grain that is consumed by the nation. So because of that, there is a rule in Ethiopia. We cannot export just the teff flour or without value addition. Like, for example, injera, of course, it is processed, we can export. There is a big demand on the international market that we're not meeting because the government is banning teff export, which I support in a way. I support that because if we say let's export everything, like, we are hurting the local consumer. I really support in that. But at the same time, the government is now encouraging to say, if you farm, if you do contractual farming and so on, which means we'll be able to export the teff grain. By doing that, what I really believe is, as you mentioned earlier as well, teff being a super grain, but at the same time, what really hurt for me is, when you see the number of, which country producing teff, Ethiopia is come #1. But as far as benefiting from the grain itself, Ethiopia is not in the picture. And that really for me is like we are missing out a big opportunity because, I know, for example, in Ethiopia, we focus on coffee because that's also one of our big products that we're exporting. But I believe by having teff and engaged in the teff farming, we should be able also to elevate the level of the teff demand in the world. So again, to be back, so commodity exchange doesn't include, but I believe in the near future, I hope they will include it. But regardless, as a private sector, I think we should be the one, we cannot just wait on commodity exchange or any other government entity. We have to do whatever we have to do to meet, the international standard and the international market need. So for now, commodity exchange doesn't include teff. Thank you.
All right, thank you. There's a question from Menika Kondi. What is the level of ISO certification in Africa COMESA region in meeting quality requirements, especially as international standards and quality infrastructure enhance businesses and facilitates trade? This question comes up quite a bit in many of our discussions. And I just want to make it clear that regional standards or African standard requirements that have been put in place are actually in conformity and aligned to international standard requirements at the WTO level. And this is, I think, African businesses are looking to trade into regional and international markets, and standards have to be harmonized across the various markets. So I think that aspect is actually quite clear that I don't think there's any particular business that's trying to operate in a silo, especially right now within the framework of international trade and investment and development. Most businesses are trying to meet the common standard practices that will allow us to access global markets. The next question is by Waktola Muleta. What are the major food safety concerns in East Africa and how can we mitigate these concerns? I'm going to take this question to Madame Paloma, especially because it is also in line with the next level of discussions, where we're going to be talking about the issue of food safety requirements and how it has also attracted a lot of attention in the region. So Paloma, you could probably respond to the constraint and food safety concerns in the region, and what are the opportunities that are also there for that, that can actually support or boost women to respond to food safety requirements in agri-trade, and by virtue of doing that, they'd also be able to respond to the purchasing requirements of buyers in our markets. And then what do you do as an association to promote food safety requirements in the region? My own interest as well in this is, how do you address the aspect of the expenses that are incurred when trying to comply to food safety requirements? Because to get certified as a business and even as an SME is very, very expensive. So are there any interventions or engagements with various partners to reduce the cost of certification? Over to you, Paloma.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. There are quite a few questions in there. So I'll attempt to answer them. If I've forgotten one, you'll remind me.
Sure. Yes.
So I think to respond to Waktola's question, you know, what are the major food safety concerns in East Africa, and how can we mitigate these concerns? And I'll talk about it a little in detail a little later on. But one of the biggest food safety concerns we have in the East African region currently is the issue of aflatoxins. Aflatoxins are a toxin that affects human health. And what we're seeing in the market is above what is the required level of 10 parts per billion. And I'll talk about the ban on maize and in the region in a little while. But in terms of, you know, what are the opportunities now for women to impact food safety in agri-trade? You know, the funny thing is there is really this common understanding that milling should produce safe and quality foods. And what does this mean? It requires people who are really detail oriented. So who better than women is the question I'd ask, because they're best known for their attention to detail and really their ability to multitask. So in my position, and I really think that one of the biggest opportunities that women have in food safety is the fact that they really think with their hearts. And what this does is it really allows them to understand the nature of food safety. And further, and most importantly, that ability to nurture is one of their biggest strengths in trying to make safe food accessible for all. You know, as an association, what do we do to build food safety or to promote food safety? And really, this is something that is critical to all associations dealing with food processing, is that really self-regulation is key for the private sector when it comes to food safety. We shouldn't be sitting back waiting for regulators or activists to tell us what to do. And we really need to know that we must do the right thing at all times. So basically, we need to test our food for aflatoxins and ensure it's within the specified levels of 10 parts per billion. And we must ensure that our food is properly fortified with essential vitamins, such as vitamin A, zinc, folic, and the rest that are required for fortification. In terms of how do we promote food safety, we hold our members to a very high standard. And this is considering that our products reach almost 80% of the consumer base in Kenya. So members are encouraged, they are audited, they are vetted on a regular basis. They have to sign a code of conduct to ensure that, you know, they have a commitment to compliance. We work hard to build the capacity of our membership. And what happened, this thankfully has led to, you know, increased compliance rates by members. You talked about cost of regulation. It is unfortunate that the cost of regulation is uneven and usually only applies to those unregulated regulated millers, those in the limelight. Unfortunately, all those who operate under this regulatory radar get away with not testing, get away with not fortifying. And so it's unfortunate that, you know, the competition now between those who are regulating and who are not regulated is quite high. And what happens is a lot of these now commercial millers tend to lose their markets because they can't compete with that price of regulation that's only being, you know, focused on certain millers or certain sections of the millers. Sandra, do you want me to talk about the ban, or I can talk about that later?
Yeah. No, you can touch on it now since you're on the subject.
Okay. So one of the things that was a question that came out was, what about the ban that has happened, you know, in Kenya? So recently, the government banned maize coming in from Tanzania and Uganda. And the reason was that some of the tests done by the Agriculture Food Authority in Kenya showed that these countries had slightly higher levels of aflatoxins than as per the standards. But I think it's important to note, you know, that there really has been a lot of work done in terms of the harmonization of standards. So sometimes really the issue is more about capacity to regulate and monitor these standards equally across the borders. We are fortunate that this ban was lifted. Unfortunately, there are very stringent requirements now and conditions for maize to come through the borders. We also realize, and I think we need to commend the government that, you know, they did do something correctly to ensure that their farmers were protected from the food safety threat. But we must ensure that there is free trade and that there is clean maize still being traded. In terms of how, you know, the the opportunity for us to actually work together with the region. I looked, and I was just telling Dr. Birunji earlier on, it might be that Kenya stopped maize coming in from Uganda and Tanzania. But what we want to do is to make sure that there is safe maize for all consumers, not only in Kenya, but within the region. So one of the opportunities that would come out of this is that we need to look at, these joint surveillance measures for the region, joint collaborations, maybe joint efforts to look at alternative uses of aflatoxin. And all this can be done by the region itself. So in effect, this also helps ensure that trade is still ongoing, but we're also protecting our consumers and making sure that the food they get is safe. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Paloma. And those are very, very key recommendations that you've also tabled on the joint surveillance committees and cross-border, efforts that can be done between like sectors to address some of these current challenges, such as food safety requirements, and clean maize coming into the markets within the region. Very, very important. I just want to now go back to you, Flora. Flora, Africa largely exports commodities as opposed to value-added products. You've touched on this in passing, and this greatly translates into exports of jobs. But from your experience, what are the bottlenecks impeding women participating in the value chains in terms of, getting job, in terms of job creation, or even boosting their own capacity to participate effectively within these value chains? And what do you think should be enhanced? Or what should we actually focus on to strengthen their participation in cross-border trade, in the value chain ecosystem, and also in terms of also participating in job creation?
All right, thank you very much. Yes, definitely value addition is something that has deluded Africa. We tend to be very happy just doing well, I don't think we're happy. I think it's just historically what it has been, where we have the commodity and then we export it, and we are quite comfortable with that. I believe one of the problems of moving up the value chain is, first of all, just even knowing what to do. What is the know-how? How do I move up the value chain? Where do I get the information? Where do I get the money? And specifically more towards the women is really around, they don't own the land that they till. They don't, they're not the asset owners. So you tend to find the husband, the family owns the land, and the woman comes and tills the land. And so that somebody else is making the decisions and not the women. However, you do find, and there was a study done, that where you do have women owning the land, perhaps their husband died and they have moved on, they actually are being able to start thinking beyond the value chain. And one of them, I think there was a study done in actually Kenya, where they looked at the avocado farming, exporting, which is a high value export. And they said, yes, when a woman was owning it, she was willing to sort of drive up to understand where the product went, as opposed to just stealing it and sending it to a middle person. Mm-hmm. So I think on a personal level, I think I'd break this down into three. Women just need to learn to think a little bit bigger than beyond here. This is what we are doing. Can we push it further? Because like we have seen even during COVID, women are the backbone of even the family. So if this came home and had a family meeting and said, hey, this land of ours, can we start thinking about progressing it to the value chain? I think it's something that they need to be able to do. I think the other challenge women face is fighting a cultural norm, be seen and not heard. If it's manufacturing, it's a male-dominated space. And this is where empowering the woman and giving her a platform to grow is going to make a difference. And of course, the other one would be around encouraging the girl child in her education to look at STEM, the science, the technology, because manufacturing, engineering, and all this sort of deals a lot with that. However, there are challenges still within the ecosystem that actually, limit women, which is the first one being access to finance. Again, like I had said earlier, collateral-based financing is what is available in a lot of African settings, and it's not around, other ways of financing, such as LC financing, debenture financing. So this will always put a woman at a disadvantage because she's not the owner of the land. Access to markets. Again, remember the woman is at home. She's not necessarily the networker. How does she get to know where are the markets? How does she get to know what's the new, value chain in town? But this has been an interesting opportunity of COVID, because all of a sudden technology is being used as a way to educate and empower. So there's going to be a lot of...
Maybe Flora, I could, while you're actually on that particular subject, I could also bring in the question from Dr. Emma Otieno, which is something that I think we should also thrash out here. How has digital transformation or e-commerce systems supported you in your business? And how do you think women should actually capitalize on this? Especially now that we're all looking at reinventing or remodeling our businesses to embrace e-commerce platforms, you know, especially within Africa and also internationally.
I think the first one for me was around access to the market, because when everybody shut down, the next thing, of course, we needed to do logically is find out, where did our consumer go? Our consumers at home, how do I reach my consumer? So we started using technology, the websites, the social media, you know, we'll get the product out there. And this also started going internationally, where somebody in Uganda, somebody in Egypt would reach out and say, I like your product. Could I have could I see it? So it's definitely slower than taking a plane and actually going and having a face-to-face, but it starts opening doors that would never perhaps have opened, because you're able to track the digital divide. Education is also another one that's really going to support the woman, because like I said, it will be on her palm of her hands to really start finding out what is the latest value chain. What can I do? I've got a lot of, let's say, pawpaws on my farm. What can I do to grow them? So this is going to be another area. But I think we were still talking about within the ecosystem, the disadvantages to women. The other one was, of course, logistics. We don't have a very sophisticated, logistics system in Africa. And this is something else that really challenges the value chain. Cost of doing business. I know in Kenya, cost of doing business is about 13% higher than some Northern African countries. So this is an area where, but this affects both genders, but this is an area where governments need to sit down with private sector and see what can we do, how can we improve this, access to information, technology. If we sort of also helped women and the youth perhaps go out and benchmark with other countries, how do they package? How do they move up the value chain? What do people do with a pineapple? They break it down, they dry it, they sell it, and what can you do with the leaves? I mean, it's a lot of opening of knowledge that is out there. So I think the final one is really a big one, which is about getting into, let's say you're doing value addition, I do the teas, to actually country brand, to take my brand to succeed in a Zambia, in a South Africa, in whatever, is a very expensive venture. And this is where we now say governments and associations need to work together to actually do what they call country branding. So if it is like tea, we say Kenyan tea is a good tea, the government supports us, and several people go behind that. If Kenya is good at avocados, so whatever competitive advantage you have in your country, I think governments and associations need to start packaging that to be exported out into the other countries.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Flora. That's well noted and also captured is one of our recommendations in this discussion. Virunji, I'd like to come to you now. There's a question from Violet Malama. She's saying, how do we change the mindset of a rural woman to begin to attend farmer field school or field demos if her husband doesn't allow her? And worse still, if she can't even make any independent decision. And I think this touches very close to the subject that you raised, where you want to train the women, but it's the men who are the decision-making parties when it comes to tilling the land or making any commercially driven decision. How do you actually deal with that? And I was also personally wondering, do you actually talk to raise awareness at the family level on this particular aspect? It'd be good to hear from you on that.
So that's a good question, and I had seen it in the chat, and I think from the experience that we have, gender transformative approaches that involve supporting communities, both the men and the women and the youth, and bringing in the leaders, the youth, the community leaders, is a much more transformative way of ensuring that women can be engaged in these value chains. If we could juxtapose, just for instance, gender-based violence, how has that been addressed? The case that if men treat their women better, they have much more stable homes, there is more income within the home, there is more stability in the community. What then does that mean for women having income at household level and participating in these activities. So I think for many men, the threat is if a woman, and from my experiences, if a woman has access to finance, she's able to get a little bit more money, she becomes big-headed. These are the realities on the ground. She's big-headed, she's difficult to manage. But I think if the case is clearly articulated for them during this whole journey, is if a woman, if we plant coffee and beans, if you get this income, you can build a house as the man from coffee. But for the woman, she'll be able to do X, Y, and Z. At the same time, she'll be able to buy food for the home. If that can be clear, the messaging is critical. How it is disseminated to the communities is very critical. But bringing in the entire community, we have seen, has been able to create this transformation. It's slow, that I must agree, but it happens. And also having champions. So when you have women champions, again, that have still had stable homes, stable marriages, addressing the real concerns that the men have, then you're able to create that change. Okay.
And then I'd like to follow up another question. In many countries and sectors, women are more limited to access resources. They have a limited access to resources, whether financial resources or banking facilities and the like. What makes it difficult, and this makes it difficult for them to be independently involved in export production. So what policies and programs do you think should be put in place to support women in agri-trade to become more export-led? It would also be good for you to touch on a subject matter that Rahel raised in terms of the fragmentation of our markets and our sectors, the lack of joint venture partnerships or industrial clusters or consortia that can come together to produce a high-value product in mass, in volume, and at a good cost for a particular market. So I'm sure there's a lot that Kilimo Trust has also done in this particular area.
Yes,
over to
okay.
you, Birunji.
Okay, I think in terms of what kind of policies or programs can be put in place, I mean, I think what we have been able to see support women get involved in regional trade in East Africa is to handhold these women and take them on exposure visits. And get women from Kenya, bring them to Uganda, understand what it entails to move into another country, the kind of barriers that you face, who you can contact in those countries, because we find that women, we have a trading platform, and this was actively utilized during the COVID period, and now we have seen numbers that we have never seen before. Women on those platforms were quiet, not so active before they go for the exchange visit or the exposure visit. But after they have gone for that visit, they have a much better understanding of who they are dealing with, because there's that inherent fear, and who do I trust? Who am I giving my money to? For men are much more risk averse. They will take a chance. They will lose once, they'll lose twice, they'll do the business. For women, they lose once, they retreat. And so hand-holding them, taking them, bringing them to Uganda, taking them to Rwanda, and knowing this is the trader you'll be buying from. This is what they have, this is how their storage facility looks like, has been a huge difference in terms of supporting women to get involved in export-led agriculture trade. Now, the other that we have seen practically, and this one I will give an example of a women group, again in Kenya. They started as a farmer group. There were about 30 women, and they were into production of maize. With support, and this is multiple programs, and again, I must reiterate that these women have been supported by different funders over a period of about 8 years, and most projects are 3 years. So one project leaves them at one point, and then another builds onto that. Is we found that the women were tired of getting small gross margins as farmers. So the exposure visit took them and brought them to Uganda and to Rwanda. They went into trading. So now they are traders, cross-border traders. Now they have even been able to negotiate a deal, because there's a quota system in supplying schools in some of the communities in Kenya. So women have been given a quota to supply a certain percentage of the produce. So they have taken advantage of that as their primary pool. They have a contract to supply a certain amount every month. they're able to use this to leverage on that to get access to finance. Again, we handheld them get financing to finance their trade. And again, they were able to create much bigger and longer business linkages right up to Rwanda, Tanzania, be able to sustain this trade and this agri-contract that they have. So the quotas, I must say, have been a game changer in terms of guaranteeing the market for these women. The exposure visits help them to build their confidence, help them to understand what opportunities are there and how best they can engage in the value chain and in agricultural trade. So for me, that is where I think the key issue is. Of course, I won't ignore the fact that from a programmatic perspective, programs are always 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So, I mean, the expectations in terms of agricultural trade are usually realized in the 4th or 5th year. And usually the outcomes are not as expected. So usually there's a bit of disappointment, but I must say that they are successes if you build on what has already been done with some of these women groups.
Okay, and maybe Dr. Birungi, I could just ask you the one recommendation you would give on what kind of what recommendations would you give the government and women in agricultural trade in terms of aspects of improving productivity in the agri-trade sector? And then what skill sets do you think we need as women traders today to respond to the evolving market dynamics that have been put in place due to COVID-19? What do you think we should focus on? What kind of skills should we be training ourselves on right now to help us remodel our businesses?
From the skills perspective, what I've seen post-COVID, I think it is networking using the current digital solutions. There are multiple approaches that women should utilize to be able to network and do business, because it is through those networks that businesses are done. And I think the other skill that women must have is negotiation. And I think in terms of developing and building the capacity of women traders, it's important for women to learn how to negotiate, not just for themselves, but for others, to be able to champion and change the status quo. They should be able to articulate those, communicate effectively, but negotiate in a manner that is beneficial, not just for them, but for others that are involved in trade. From a policy perspective, in terms of enhancing productivity. And I wanted this as my major contribution to this discussion, is that we have a dearth of agricultural information in the East African community that constrains so many aspects of increasing productivity, of promoting trade, of enhancing market growth, because we just don't have the numbers. I'll give you an example. I was on the task force for Uganda to support women, to support traders as a nation post-COVID. What do we do as a country? But we sat with Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Trade, representative from civil society organization, and we don't have numbers. There is no one who has any numbers anywhere about how much has been produced in this region, in terms of volumes of maize, how much was planted, how many extension officers have helped this. We don't know. So can we plan effectively? No. And that is, I think, at the heart of why we cannot plan effectively, right from the private sector level, the public sector, and even in the value chains. People can't understand, what do I need to do to invest if I have an option of avocado and maize? Where is the market for maize? How big is it? And who is selling this information? Because Kilimo Trust says it, a few farmers know it, but we're working with only 500,000 farmers. There are over 15, 20 million smallholder farmers in the whole of East Africa. How do we support this? We must take advantage of agricultural information. And if there's one thing that can be done, is build the capacity of the public sector to gather accurate information, not just agricultural statistics, real-time information, because digitalization is requesting, it needs that. On these platforms, people are asking, I need 1,000 metric tons of maize, grade 3. You're able to respond and say it is at point X. I can give it to you, take a picture, give you the quality and tell you what exactly you want. We're not going to ever transform this sector and promote regional trade, continental trade, if we don't have those numbers.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor. In fact, you're emphasizing on a project that I think many organization, development partners, implementing partners, the RECs are thinking about, and that's the project of digital trade facilitation. It's very key. But I'm also very, very glad you've emphasized on the aspect of aggregating data to inform business decisions on trade, on markets, on production capacities, and also moving goods and services across the region. I also want to just guide that a lot of companies have decided to even come together through private-to-private partnerships and share their data so they can actually inform market decisions on this. So I'm glad that you're actually making a call also to government to do the same. And I'm hoping that the partners, stakeholders, businesses, and other and companies who are here in present are looking at this particular aspect, so could actually pick up on the discussion afterwards. Rahel, so my next question comes to you, and there are also quite a number of questions that have been raised also on the platform. You touched on the subject of middlemen and middlewomen. I'm hoping you've seen the question in the chat group that you could respond to that. But I want to bring you back to the aspect of trade promotion organizations and trade facilitation organizations. How have they worked with you as a business to help you tap into regional and international markets? And what do you think they can do better to help businesses like yours grow beyond Ethiopia into other markets? And then secondly, it would be great to see how you as an industry and how businesses like yours have looked at digitizing your cross-border market linkages, and also looking at how you've used digital technical facilities to improve the production of TEF, even at a national level. Over to you, Rahel.
For the first question, trade organization or association, how they can help us is just, for example, we can take embassies abroad, the commercial section, they can do the facilitation of business linkage, because that way it will shorten, the work that has been done on the private sector. Because as I said earlier, we cannot do everything. We cannot be the processor, we cannot be the market linkage facilitator, and so on. So by having association, it will help us. But at the same time, as a private sector also, when we talk about association, I don't want to also take this and just mix it in a bowl, meaning as a private sector, also the key responsibility falls on the company themselves. By saying always by giving up our need just only to the trade association, it wouldn't help us. But the only way I would say is by having a strong association. They will, for example, I can tell you at the export destinations, by most of the time, the challenge we face is about like price negotiation. With the price negotiation, it happens mostly in Africa, I believe. If I sell something for much cheaper, because I'm not benefiting the country, I'm not benefiting the business. But businesses has to be very careful when they try to bypass you and try to sell cheaper. They can take away businesses for a small time, shorter period, but eventually it will backfire on them. And also by doing that, what we're doing is lowering the value of our products. So by this association coming in picture, what we can add is like having a lower, like a level of pricing. When say pricing, you don't go below that price. There has to be a rule. If that happens, what will happen is, for example, the National Bank, they can give us the price level. You can go higher, but not lower. If that happens, it is enforced also by the trade association. We are benefiting the country. That is where the farmers are benefiting well. Otherwise, just to take away my business. If you are selling cheaper and cheaper, eventually we both will die. You're not going any further. As far as digitization, nowadays, especially, business is coming more, like the world is becoming smaller. And the digitization, how it helps us is by having accurate market information. When I say accurate, on time, because I don't want information that was done a year ago, because that wouldn't help. Digitization somehow that will help us by having us accurate, timely information, so that we can, we can adjust to the time. Just let's take about COVID. How many of the farmers are informed about COVID? This is for me, in the rural areas. How are they really informed? How are they really know about the export market or the international market, how the COVID is impacting? I doubt it, I don't think there is such communication coming down to the farmers. So the only way digitizing that should help them is to minimize the gap of understanding, to minimize the gap of information exchange, by having that, the processor and also the farmer can minimize their loss by having timely information. But in order to do all this, I think, the key thing, what I really believe in the agriculture processing sector is, the first thing is understanding your product, understanding the value of your product, because most of the time we don't. Most of the time, as I said, the middleman is, again, the major market disruptor is the middleman. And, and it is the middleman who doesn't work anything, contribute a thing. It is about a phone call, but it is a farmer who works, it is a processor who work hard. And by eliminating the middleman, that is, I think, when we can progress. So that's where digitization comes, because you don't have information from the middle person. You can directly have the information from the market itself. For example, we have this commodity exchange, the question earlier, if commodity exchange added more and more to their database, I think we will be smart, because that way we have organized of, or aggregated way of organizing our product for the market. So it's all about, more and more technologies, becoming viable. But again, how vast it is distributing is also my question. So I think equal distribution of digitization is also key to the success of, agribusiness in general.
Okay.
To answer your question.
Yes, you did, sir. Thank you. And as we're coming to concluding, I shall be asking each and every one of you to give me your 2 recommendations for this forum. But before we do that, I just want to come back to you, Flora. So as an export-oriented farm, what are some of the challenges you've been facing in terms of accessing regional markets? And what key recommendations would you like to give in terms of addressing some of these challenges?
Thank you, my dear. I think exporting, the challenge is usually the typical, you have the tariff barriers, which are the tariffs different countries put up, and then the non-tariff barriers. Of course, again, in Africa, we have a lot of logistical problems. It is cheaper for me to take my product to Europe than, in America, than to take it around in some countries in Africa. So I think that's also another real challenge. The other one is access to markets, just knowledge of what's going on in these markets. I think African markets, we haven't documented very clearly. We don't know where the distributors are. So you tend to have to rely on visiting the country, knowing somebody, and really doing the heavy lifting more or less yourself. And then, and with that is just access to knowledge, who's the biggest distributor, what do they buy, how do they buy, what does the market look like, are they modern trade driven? So those are really what I would say in a nutshell, the bigger problems around, trading in Africa. And what solutions would I have? I think number one, the whole Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is a beautiful idea. And I'd just like to encourage, the regional blocks, the 8 of them, to continue harmonizing their processes, because I know it hasn't gotten its traction yet. But the fact that there's the political will, we need to hasten the implementation of this by harmonizing all our 8 regional blocks so that we can begin trading with each other. Because like I was sharing earlier, inter-Africa trade is only 25%. We only trade with each other 25%. Europe is, I think, something like 65, and Asia is something like 45. So there's a huge opportunity. And like we know, the rest of the world is sort of coming this way. I think the other thing we need to do is we need to rethink how we mobilize funds. Like I was saying, collateral-based lending, it seems to be the easiest thing to do. Can we look at more modern trade? And I think I was sharing earlier where I was saying in Ethiopia, I know there's a fund that actually gives money to women based on a psychometric test. Because women do repay. Women are better business people than men. So that for me is going to be a big one. Lowering the cost of doing business. Governments need to sit down and say, what can we do to really bring down the cost of doing business? Is electricity, can be subsidized? What do we need to move to green? What can we do, logistically? Could we have some form of protection for infant industries so that we're not being always put up against the cheaper importations who have developed their own manufacturing industries years ago. And now they're coming to almost literally dump in our own country. So infancy protection, I think, is going to be a big one. Buy local, build local, definitely is going to be something else that is going to be very important, because as the government or as countries start also buying from themselves, they strengthen the muscle of these companies who are able then to grow bigger and to export and leave the much needed foreign exchange. Of course, leveraging technology, is definitely very, very important. Whether it's about accessing your markets, whether it's about knowledge, using technology to actually get to know what's happening. Driving more opportunities around innovation. Look at what happened in Madagascar. They came out with this tonic and they said, this is going to help us do better. I do know in Kenya, there's somebody who came out with a like Zoom product. So we need to continue to promote and incubate innovation in Africa, because this is the food basket of Africa. It's the wage, the labor is going to be coming from here. The opportunities are really, really around us. And of course, supporting businesses in knowledge sharing, in market access. Assistance from governments. I know the Egyptian government lately has been actually creating, what would you call it, warehouses in countries that they want their people to sort of promote their products. And this then helps a local manufacturer, because I don't take a risk. I take my product, I put it in our government, go down in that particular country, and the rest of my work is then to start looking for markets. So a lot of partnerships with governments, with NGOs, with private sector. So fostering a lot more public-private partnerships. I think that's going to be important. Yes, and then a lot of virtual workplaces and working opportunities. All of a sudden, for women, we do not have to be in the office to physically get work done. And that's been a beautiful advantage for this particular season. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have. I just want to touch on one thing, though. Given that you wear a hat as the former chair of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, I know you championed an agenda of setting up, founding the Women in Manufacturing platform. Yes. So what kind of spaces would you like to see women trading into in the manufacturing ecosystem? It would be very interesting to also understand why they're not going there.
I think one of the biggest problems, I think with women is perhaps, let's start with mindset. It's male dominated. I don't want to go there. I can't go there. I'm not able to go there. The second real reality is funding. If I want to get into business, for me to borrow some money and start trading is instant. I perhaps go to wherever I'm going, bring the product, I trade it, I made my money. Whereas in things like manufacturing, you tend to have to build you have to get the knowledge, buy the equipment, is capital intensive, and then you get into business. One of my biggest passions and dreams when we started the Women in Manufacturing is to see women scale, because women actually manufacture a lot. You'll always see a woman is either knitting, she's sewing, she's making earrings, she's making baskets. But we need to see that in a large scale. We need to understand that is the beginning. That primary step is actually the beginning of a large industry. All those products we see coming into our countries using our hard-earned foreign exchange was somebody's dream years ago. So for me, it's really around mindsets. It's around you believing in yourself and us pulling together to go and actually now push the financial institutions and say, hey, we want funds as women. We might not have the exact collateral, but give us debenture financing, give us stock loans, give us invoice discounting. So it's to create a voice and to create a network also for the women to pull together, because you know how we operate as women. I think we're such perfectionists that if we don't cross the T and dot the I, we don't believe we can do it. Whereas men, there's a statistic done that is men start businesses to be big, but women start businesses to do something. So that is what the notion we are trying to change, to really make women believe that they can do it. We actually have one of our gala dinners in 2 days, and that's one of the other messages we're saying. We can do it, but let's learn to do it big. Let's learn to take risks. We're risk averse as women. Let's learn to take the risks like the men take the risks. And what better person to take a risk than a woman? Because we're so averse, we're going to make sure we've crossed all the T's and dotted the I's. So there's no failure that, there are challenges. So the whole idea is to prop us up, to really, really ask women to come to the manufacturing table.
That's good. And I hope the ladies out here are also listening, and I believe that gives you a lot of incentive and motivation to explore manufacturing productivity. Paloma, I'd like to bring the question of the middleman to what policies or strategies should be put in place to alleviate the challenge of middlemen. They often sell their product most often at a throwaway price. I think Rahel also responded by asking or making a request to have a minimum price threshold that does not run her out of business, as a company. What would you do, Paloma? Because I believe you face this challenge a lot within your industry.
Yeah, so interestingly, I've always likened, the middleman and the broker to these motorbike riders. And, everybody stops at the traffic lights, and the motorbike rider, he has no constraints. And those of us who then stop at the traffic lights, which are the farmers, the millers, the transporters, the policeman will still come and see if you are regulated and if you have your insurance or whatever. So I've always, I know there is this concern about middlemen, but the more and more we research on them, we realize that there is a job that they are doing for the economy. And whether it's to help the farmers and, give them early money or whatever, it is a job that they're doing. What we need to do is really find a way to regulate them. And I'll tell you an example of what the Agriculture Food Authority is doing in Kenya right now. With the event of the ban of maize coming from Tanzania and Uganda, what they've said is you cannot bring maize into Kenya if you are not registered with the Agriculture Food Authority. That means for the first time ever in the history of Kenya possibly, is that they're now trying to regulate the middlemen and the traders and the brokers. What this means now is that when you regulate them, there's a lot more traceability. They have to tell you where they're bringing their product from, where they're taking it from. In terms of what Rahel was saying, have this minimum price, yes, because now you're going to be educating the farmers, do not expect less than this for your product. The other things that can be done differently is if you do direct contract farming with your farmers, I think is an opportunity to also cut out that middleman, because you've already got that direct relationship. The other thing that's happening in Kenya, and I think also within the region, is the warehouse receipting systems. And what happens is a farmer is really desperate. He takes his produce to the warehouse, he gets his receipt, he can trade that or get a loan for that or whatever. So what it does is it reduces the farmer's reliance on selling his product, because now he has the opportunity. So I think, yes, I agree that they are not following the rules, but there is an opportunity to regulate them just like the rest of us are being regulated. So why should they be any different? So that's what my thoughts would be on this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Paloma. This is also well noted. Like I said, we are developing a report and recommendations that we shall be tabling for advocacy through various channels and platforms within the COMESA Business Council. We have 13 business sectors. There's one specifically focused on agri-industry and trade, which will drive some of these issues. COMESA has a regional women entrepreneurs institution called FEMCOM, recently named COMFWIB. We shall definitely also bring some of these aspects to their attention, and we shall also be driving them through the policy organ level. So we do hope that the recommendations that are coming out here are tangible, strategic, and practical to respond to the needs of the industry, and especially also on women inclusiveness in agro-industry trade. So on that note, I'd like to ask everybody here to give me one key recommendation that I'd like to table to the floor. as we come to the close of this meeting. So let me start with you, Dr. Birungi. What is your key recommendation to the meeting?
My key recommendation, I will stick with agricultural information. Let us ensure that we can build the capacity of local at the country level on agricultural information at all levels. And this will also drive financial inclusion. This will also reduce the information asymmetry that mobile money is presenting in the different economies. And the synergies are huge in terms of where we can leverage from having accurate agricultural information. And that said, I think we can also build on a joint collaboration among government ministries and private sector, just like what Palamo has said. Already, there's information that has already been put in place on at the Agricultural Food Authority on traders. Let us not have another program that is getting that information in Kenya. Let's build on to that and let that information in the public domain so that government can now know those are the traders. A private farmer group can now know these are the registered traders. I mean, I think there's a lot of synergies that can be built on both from public and private sector if we can build our capacity in agricultural information. And the last thing I will say, since it is Women's Month, I choose to challenge our silence. Let us stand up and let our voices be heard in every space that we are in. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Birungi. That's excellent. Rahel, what is your last your final key recommendation to the meeting?
You know, Africa being more than half of it being a woman, and Africa being blessed with such nature, with all that, by now we should be feeding, in my opinion, we should be feeding the world. But in order for us to be able to feed the world, we have to do some our homework ourselves, which is organization. When I say organization, there should be some collaboration. The collaboration needs to be, you know, we have to be environmentally savvy. And at the same time, also, we have to capitalize on most of the products that we are just sending as raw material. I think that Africa is the main source of raw material for most products. I just heard last week, for example, I heard about Ghana not, you know, wants to retain cocoa, just instead of exporting cocoa, being able, why not, processing chocolate. You know, we have to think in that aspect of the processing in Africa. By doing that, I think if we really work on value addition, I think in a very short time, I think we will exceed Africa beyond expectation and beyond what we can imagine that what we could have done. But in order to do this, I think the first and the most important thing is we need to understand and we need to implement collaboration among the private sector, the government who is doing the research and development. And at the same time, you know, we have to strengthen association and trade firms. If we do that, and the other most aspect is about finance. If you also allow this women, farmers, to be able to having access to finance, because the most important thing is, even I heard earlier, for example, it is the man dominating, you know, the woman. But what I really believe is, if a man see that the woman is bringing an income, I don't think, you know, that is the only way we can overcome. Not we can, you know, we can bring so many rules and regulation, but the main fact is, if you show that the woman can benefit, the woman can, you know, be the contributor of the economical aspect of the society, I think that is how we can win. But in order to do all this, governments, you know, at the same time, also what I really want to mention here is, we always talk about, you know, giving women priority, doing that. But remember, women are strong. By saying this, we shouldn't put emphasis saying that we need this kind of support because we are less. We are not. So the most important thing is to acknowledge our strength and then to be able to fill in the gap where we need to fill in the gap. By doing that, I think that is where we'll be able to excel. And also, like, to the organizers, what I would like to say is, First of all, I really would like to thank you to have this in the month of the Women Month. But at the same time, you know, by us saying Women Month, we are lessening the importance. For me, every day should be a Woman Month. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Rahel. And indeed, beyond the International Women's Month, will definitely be able to push forward some of these agendas. So Paloma, could you kindly give your last recommendation as we come to the close of the meeting? Then we'll move to Flora, and then we'll bring the meeting to a close. Yes, Paloma.
Okay, so I think I'm really happy with the recommendations made by the ladies on this panel. They've worked with a lot of other ladies. They understand what's necessary. I unfortunately have not worked with that many ladies. I have worked more with men. But I think in what I see is, you know, really the perception of women not wanting to belong in factories or in industry. I think maybe what I see it is a lot of these are childhood, you know, it comes from your childhood. And maybe I feel like, and I know Kenya is doing that a lot, is really looking at our syllabuses really down in primary schools and secondary schools and really changing the syllabuses to suit what's going on. So maybe this is something that we need to think about, is how do we encourage women to start thinking differently? If you remember before in our syllabuses, they would show ladies either, you know, feeding their children, either knitting. There were very specific roles for women. And I think I would be happy to see, you know, a woman in a construction hat with a hard hat out there, and then that kind of perception kind of works for all of us, for our children, as they grow up to realize, you know, this world is their oyster. And I think just finally, I think we shouldn't be afraid to be the only women in the room, because many times we will be the only women in the room. I think what we need to learn is just to focus on what we can bring to the table. And once you do that, many people start focusing on what you bring to the table rather than your gender. And I think as women, we're really, really lucky. You know, we have the ability to make an impact because we actually can think with our heart and our head in equal measures. And I think that's our greatest strength. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Paloma. Very, very interesting final remarks. Flora, over to you. Your microphone is off. Ask him, yeah.
Sorry, I'm saying I choose to challenge as well. And I do agree with a lot of the recommendations, and I just perhaps will be echoing two of them. I think my biggest passion is always the value addition, because like I said, I feel we are leaving a lot of value on the table. And one of the, as we're pushing to do this, one of the things we have to do is continue to build the capacity, build the woman, leverage on technology, leverage on actually making sure that we give her finance. We need to relook at the way we ask for finance, and we actually encourage the banks to give us different models of using finance, driving innovation, and improving productivity. And of course, lowering the cost of doing business. All this will sort of come together and help us add value and actually be able to export that value from the continent of Africa. There was a lot of conversation around standards. I could not echo that more. I think we are judged, just like we're women, we are judged on a different parameter than anybody else. When a product is coming from Africa, for it to succeed globally, it will be judged on a higher platform. So it's important for us to just realize that and see what we can do, what capacities we can do. And leveraging technology today, you know, whether you're using the technology to tell the women where the markets are, get rid of the middleman, this is where we can buy your product. There's a lot we can do around leveraging technology. I think my final one would be about, let us continue to promote the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, because that is the only way I feel we are going to also give ourselves an advantage. Because these foreign countries, you know, what would you say, the rest of the world has been exporting into Africa, but no, we are not taking advantage of our own continent. And if we just continue to rally our governments and our regional blocs to actually harmonize and really just get traction on this, I believe it is a game changer. And it will be a game changer for the woman. We should also ask for preferential agreements in there for the women, you know, like we've done in Kenya, where we say 30% will be going for women. Absolutely. We can push for 40, and that will help us really, really grow and bring women to the table.
just want to ask Marian, I hope you're there. I think it would be a great time for us to actually, because we are now closing our International Women's Month campaign that we've been doing at CBC, and this event that we've partnered with the Feed the Future East African Market System is the final closing of this particular campaign. So in the spirit of that, I'd just like us to put up our hands and do the choose to challenge, a symbol as Marian takes the picture. I believe all of us have have decided to we've actually pledged something, we've committed to something or two, where we would also want to do one or two things in terms of improving the stereotype for women in industry, and especially promoting industry inclusiveness and changing the mindset, even at the grassroots level, at the education level. So in that particular respect, I hope all of us will commit to doing this at a national level. So thank you all for your commitment, your pledge, and also your passion in driving some of these agendas. It's a pleasure having engaged and discussed with. Hands down. That was thank you very much, Olivier. Before we close the meeting, Olivier has been a co-partner of this event through Feed the Future. I'd like to ask you to just say one or two words before we close. And also for the people in the chat group, it would be great if you want to, for the panelists, the participants, you can always just type what you'd want to commit to or what you choose to challenge in your own narrative in the countries that you're coming from. We have over 16 countries participating here, so please just fill in what information that you'd have, and of course we'll capture this and share it back with you as such you're part and parcel of this discussion and engagement. Olivier, please, over to you. Your microphone is okay. There you go. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Sandra, for presenting these interesting panel discussions. I learned a lot, and the different discussion confirmed what some of the key area discussion we've been having even with CBC. And my final word would be, ladies, it's time to challenge the status quo. We've committed to challenge the situation, the context, but I think it begins with us. It begins with us as the private sector, but also it begins with us as people who have to challenge the structure, the norms, the policies. So there is a space for policy engagement. Organizations like CBC is there to represent your voice, but you need to participate in different engagements so that CBC or any other regional or business council or business association is serving you better. So we talked of networking, we talked of the embracing technology, we talked of being innovative, but without committing to change ourselves, I don't think that all those spaces will be optimized. So IMS, the East African Market System activity, is there to create some spaces for engagement. We are here to provide some incentive for private sector to invest in expanding their outreach in terms of the regional markets. But we need to also start challenging our own business models. If you are a miller or you're adding value to any commodity, can you start thinking of how you can add more women in your supply chain? Do you need to stay with your business model, or you need to challenge your business model? So this sign of challenging the status quo also goes in challenging our business models, and IMS is there to facilitate that, and we will be happy to hear from you. We'll be happy to coordinate with CBC on the best way you can support women in getting plugged in the regional and global value chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. So on that note, we have come to the end of this meeting, of this webinar. I do hope that you have enjoyed it thoroughly. Just to give our audience the heads up that next week on the 30th of March, we shall be training our business associations and manufacturers on the African Continental Free Trade Area protocols, specifically the protocols on the trade in goods and on standards and SPS issues and how to access markets using the CFTA. So I'd like to invite everybody in this meeting to register for the event. You will be receiving an email from us that will inform you of the same. The training will be taking place online, of course, through a meeting, so that it will be more interactive than a webinar. You'll be able to ask questions directly to the trainers from UNECA and from the Africa Regional Standards Organization. So we look forward to seeing you then. Prepare the right questions to ask about how to access markets within the CFTA and how the CFTA influences, impacts your business. So on that note, I'd like to come to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, Paloma, Virunji, Flora, Rahel. Successful event. Have a good afternoon or good evening from wherever you are. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.